Hello, Octalysis Primers. Today, we have a very special guest. Today, we're going to talk to Dr. Barbara Oakley, who is a distinguished professor of systems engineering at Oakland University. She's the author of over a dozen books, including titles such as On Common Sense Teaching, Learn Like a Pro. And she also created some of the world's most popular, massively open online courses, the MOOCs. How are you doing today?
I'm doing just well. How are you, Yu-kai?
I'm doing great. And now that I'm talking to you, even better. So why don't you start off giving a brief background of yourself and your work, and don't hold back the achievements. Don't need to be modest here. We're all here to just be impressed about our guests so that we can learn more from you and this conversation.
Oh, sometimes I think my chief achievement is being a mischief maker. So I guess I grew up hating math and science. It just was one of those things. I never got switched on somehow. And the older I got, the worse I got. And I thought, I think I'd like to learn another language when I graduated from high school. And I know for many people, it's like, of course, I speak 2, 3, 4 languages like you, Yu-kai. So, but I couldn't afford to go to college. So I enlisted in the Army to learn a language. And I went to the Defense Language Institute, which it turns out is one of the best language learning institutions in the world. I learned Russian. I should have learned Chinese. But I ended up working on Soviet trawlers up in the Bering Sea, and I worked down in Antarctica at the South Pole Station in Antarctica, and that's where I met my husband. So I like to say I had to go to the end of the earth to meet that man. But I just loved having new adventures and new perspectives. So when I was 26 and I was getting out of the Army, I suddenly began to realize that this idea of follow your passion in life and do what you love, which was learning another language, wasn't necessarily the best advice, in that I kind of like forgot that you need to make a living in the world. And it's good to not just be thinking about your own passions, but also what the world needs. So I thought, well, why don't I see if I can like retrain my brain and learn in math and science? Because there sure seems to be a lot of call for people working in those areas. And I went to the university, started with the lowest level of mathematics possible, which was remedial high school algebra, slowly began climbing my way upwards, began learning technology. And now I'm a distinguished professor of engineering, which if you'd known me as a child, you'd be like, no, doesn't compute. So anyway, now I teach some of the world's largest massively open online courses with Terry Sinowski, who's the Francis Crick professor at the Salk Institute. And we just love bringing insights from neuroscience that are actionable and practical, that help people learn. And this is why I'm also fascinated about gaming and the area of, I know you don't like the word gamification, but trying to incorporate some of the best aspects of the gaming world into how we educate others. I love how researcher Daphne Bavelier says that trying to mix games with education is like trying to mix chocolate with broccoli and have something that's a really good, tasty dish. It's really tough to do. But I think that there are so many insights from the world of gaming. We follow in parallel paths, and so we can inform each other with our ideas.
Great. Yeah, it's such an inspiring story. You didn't like math, science, and even finding a language, learning a new language as your path, the passion you want to pursue, is pretty unique. Very few people think, oh, learning a new language is chasing after my dreams. Some people go to Hollywood, right? Some people nowadays, people do YouTube stuff. You just want to learn a language, and very, very few people go so far to learn language, be in the military and be in the Navy base and travel around. And usually those lifestyles are not so comfortable. I imagine it's not the most comfortable way to learn language. These days, people just go on a MOOC, they download Duolingo, they learn language. It's pretty straightforward. You had to, in a sense, go to the ends of the world to, learn the language you want, including and meet your husband. So that's a very, very unique and romantic story right there. Interestingly, I don't know if you know, I was just in Singapore last week, and in Singapore, they were deciding, because they have a very big Chinese population, but they were trying to decide between into what should they do for the second national language, and they were choosing between English and Russian, because back in the day, it was relevant choice. I'm sure you're familiar with that relevant choice. They end up choosing English as their national language that they do business with, which I think end up benefiting Singapore. But at the time, no one knew how the Cold War would end up being. So right now, when you say Russian, I think a lot of people will think, oh, that's such a random language. But back in the day, it was a very serious consideration. Was that why you were choosing between? That's why you chose Russian, because of the geopolitical situations at the time?
I think it was a number of considerations. Yes, I was interested in, people would say, oh, the Soviet Union is a wonderful place. Oh, the Soviet Union is a horrible place. And you couldn't really make sense unless you actually went there yourself to figure out what was going on, which was, of course, difficult to do. And if you spoke the language, you could really learn more truth of what was going on. But I really would have liked to have learned Chinese, but I was so afraid that Chinese, you could devote a lifetime and still, it's so remarkably different. Russian is different, but you can kind of pick up enough to do okay without devoting 5 to 8 years of your life of dedicated study, in trying to pick that up. But at the same time, I do think that even for children growing up learning Chinese, the focused attention needed to learn all of the ideographs really helps train focusing abilities, I believe. So that I think it's easier for those who have grown up learning Chinese to be able to focus more intently on things. And this has great attributes, and it also has some trade-offs.
Yeah, what would be some of these trade-offs be?
So it turns out that the brain has 2 completely separate modes of thinking. One is that focus mode, which is called task-positive networks by psychologists. The second is what I call diffuse mode. Psychologists call it the task-negative network. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network. But when I say diffuse, it's like what the brain is doing when it's not really doing much. It's not focusing on things. It's just relaxing. And it turns out that this relaxing is a very valuable thing to be doing if you want to make random new creative connections. So when you're focusing, and if you focus a lot during the day, and maybe you even do focused mode mantra meditation, you are enhancing that focus mode capability. You're doing it all the time. And that can inadvertently suppress the activities of the diffuse mode. So that means that you have more trouble falling into that and accessing some of those creative, kind of bizarre sometimes, new connections that can help make for different ways of looking at, more creative ways of looking at things. So open monitoring type of meditation often can enhance this default mode, diffuse way of thinking. But it's important to allow both networks to have their role in what you're doing, because it will help you to be both focused and productive, but also creative in what you're doing.
Yeah, in one of our Octalysis Prime videos, one of the earliest ones, we talk about the literature on a clean desk versus a messy desk. The video is about most people think clean desk is the best, but actually depends on your goals, because the clean desk allows you to focus, you're more productive, but a messy desk makes people more creative because of every item subconsciously priming us to be distracted, but hence think more openly to things. So I think it's that related content there.
You are so right. We're often told when you're focusing, and I say this, I'll be like, use the Pomodoro technique, which is like 25 minutes of no distraction, and focus as intently as you can, and then relax for 5 minutes. And this is a really good way to be productive. But what they found is if you're stuck in things, if you do like some web surfing and you let yourself be distracted, it helps you get out of these sort of intellectual ruts and be more creative. So it's just like the desk sort of thing is the idea of, a little web surfing isn't always bad.
Yeah, I remember I had an editor who asked me, how do I get creative when I have writer's block? And I was a little embarrassed with my answer. I was like, well, I don't have a good answer. I kind of just lie on the ground and I just start rolling around, just like kind of procrastinating, being a loser. And so I was just like, sheepish answer. And then he was like, oh, wow, that's such a good idea. Just rolling around on the ground. I'm like, wait, how is that a good idea? That's just like some random foolish activities when you're stuck. And then he felt like that was a way to just be, a lot of people get that state when they're showering, right? Just like be in a state of just not thinking about something intently, but just open your mind to anything that you can receive.
I think I'm going to have to try the roll on the ground, and then I'll go take a shower.
Yes. Great. And so that's just the first part of your story. Their second part is even more inspiring. The first part is fascinating, and the second part is inspiring because you suddenly decided, hey, I want to take a totally different path in life. And you said you really didn't like anything related to math, but then you decided, hey, seems to all this kind of math and engineering stuff seems what we call STEM these days, seems to be useful for occupation purposes, finding a job and making a living. And then you just go straight into what you, in a sense, felt like you didn't even have talent for, right? You didn't like, nor did you feel like you had talent for, but you just went into school and started studying. How difficult was that decision? I know a lot of people wouldn't make that choice. So what drove you to actually, make that commitment?
I think it goes back to epic meaning, which applies in games as well as in life. And I thought, what is the real essence of me? The essence of me is being open to new adventures, but isn't changing how you think about things a new adventure? I mean, in some sense, traveling the world, going to Mexico, going to Iceland, going to South Africa, that's an adventure, but it's not as, in some ways it's an easier adventure than actually crawling within your mind and saying, I'm going to change how I think about things. So I really, it was a harder decision to make at that time than it is today, because today you can start studying online with different materials. Back in those days, I had to just stop my life and go to the university and give it a try. But it was at a good break point in my life. I was getting out of the military. I had to do something. And I figured, the next 5-10 years are going to go by anyway. Why don't I just try and see if I can make some changes? Because clearly the path that I had set out for myself learning a language was awesome. It really taught me a lot about learning that I use today and are integral to everything I do. but at the same time, I needed more. And so I just figured that I would take that risk of trying to see. And I did it, as I realize now, I did it pretty intelligently. I didn't assume I was very smart. So I started at the lowest possible level.
Hey, wait. The video's not ended yet. Well, the video's ended, but there's another video coming out as part 2. So why don't you go check it out?